The shrill screech of metal chains yanked tight against a reinforced steel handle echoed across the quiet suburb, shattering the lazy afternoon calm like glass. Karen Witherspoon, the self-declared queen of the HOA, stood with her foot on the latch of the basement hatch behind Ryan's home, snapping shut a thick industrial padlock with one final clink of arrogance. There. That should keep whatever he's hiding down there from leaking into the community. She smirked to her clipboard-clutching entourage as if she'd just shut down a biohazard lab. A confused neighbor asked, "Was that even legal?" Karen didn't flinch. "If he has nothing to hide, he shouldn't need a lockdown there anyway. Besides, I'm the board president. I don't need permission. I give it." What she didn't know, and what no one outside of certain government circles knew, was that the sealed door beneath her feet wasn't just a basement. It was a Homeland Security data node, a classified server hub connected directly to federal infrastructure. And with that padlock, she'd just triggered a federal breach alarm that could bring black SUVs, helicopters, and a cybersecurity response unit to her quiet little cul-de-sac. Ryan's phone vibrated 3 times in a row as he stepped off the airport shuttle and into the rideshare. He glanced down. No names. Just numbers and one encrypted message from an internal Homeland line. Lockdown triggered. Remote access disabled. Physical entry blocked. 72 hours until critical response. He exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. He hadn't even been gone a full day. He had told no one, not even his closest neighbors, about the actual function of the room under his home. It was easier that way. Less questions. Less risk. The agreement with Homeland was strict. The equipment would be housed under deep concealment, out of public knowledge, and would serve as a secondary security cluster for high-priority data redundancy. In layman's terms, it was part of the nation's immune system against cyberattacks. And Karen, in all her nosy authority, had just clamped a $12 lock on a room that needed a Level 3 biometric scan to operate properly. He arrived home 20 minutes later. 3 HOA trucks were still parked outside his driveway, and the yard had small flag markers around the perimeter like it was some archaeological dig site. A folding table had been set up by the curb where Karen sipped lemonade while reviewing her printed HOA codebook like a sacred scripture. "Ah, Mr. Tech Wizard returns," she called out before he even reached the porch. "You'll be glad to know we secured your property while you were away. That little door out back? Completely locked. Don't worry, we'll let you back in once the board approves your usage request." Ryan didn't blink. He just asked one thing. "Where's the key?" Karen laughed and waved vaguely at her clipboard. "It's in the HOA office safe until further notice. You can make a formal petition if you'd like." He walked past her without another word. His hand hovered over the biometric scanner next to the back entry hat. The display blinked red 3 times. Access denied. Manual override not available. Federal systems frozen. He knew exactly what that meant. The basement was live. Locked out from both ends. Karen had essentially trapped the servers in a dead zone. Left alone, they would engage contingency shutdown and wipe within 72 hours, assuming compromise. That meant billions of lines of secure data would vanish. And more importantly, the system would trigger internal fail-safe audits, meaning agents, real ones, not clipboard commandos, would be dispatched to investigate physical interference. And that meant the clock had started. He paced inside the house. He needed a way in without tampering with the external lock. Any damage to the physical structure would signal tampering, possibly with criminal penalties, even for him. It was like watching your house catch fire, knowing you're not allowed to smash the window to put it out. He called his handler. The line was curt. "Did someone lock you out?" "Yes," Ryan replied. "Local HOA. Unauthorized. Ignorant but determined." A pause. Then the voice said, "Do not escalate. But be warned, you have 36 hours before we escalate for you." The call ended. Karen walked by the fence, sunglasses reflecting sunlight and smugness both. "Don't worry, Ryan," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "We'll make sure your bunker's up to code. Maybe we'll finally see what you've been hiding in there." One of her board members laughed. "Watch it be filled with old pizza boxes and nerd toys." She grinned wider. "Let them laugh," Ryan muttered to himself, eyes fixed on the blinking red denial code. "But when the feds knock, they won't be asking for a meeting." That night, a nondescript white van labeled Advanced Tree Services pulled up 2 blocks away. Inside sat 3 men. One wore a comms headset. One had a portable fiber scanner. The last one simply stared out the tinted window, watching Karen's house. "They don't even know what they stepped into," he said quietly. The other agent replied, "Local interference on federal hardware. We've seen this before. One time a homeowners association buried an antenna during a yard renovation and didn't realize they were rerouting FAA signals." The man in the headset replied, "Good thing we brought the drone jammer. We might need to cut local feeds soon if this spreads." The back of the van had a silent red light glowing. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Watching. Waiting. Back in the neighborhood, Karen uploaded a short video of herself locking the basement earlier that day. She captioned it, "Finally cleaning up the block, one secret door at a time." She didn't notice the odd comment beneath the post that simply said, "Do you understand what you've done?" She laughed it off, deleted it, blocked the commenter. She didn't recognize the name. She didn't know it belonged to a cybersecurity investigator monitoring breaches of domestic intel infrastructure. And she definitely didn't know her own IP address had just been logged. Ryan sat in the dark. A storm brewed outside. Lightning cracked behind the window as he drafted a single email, to be auto-sent if anything happened to him, if the board escalated, or if Karen got close enough to open that hatch. It wasn't revenge. It was protocol. It contained timestamps, camera feeds, authorization codes, and one critical attachment: a video of Karen smirking while sealing the server vault. As thunder rolled, the message blinked on his screen: "Failsafe armed. Contingency log. Ready." At exactly 3:04 a.m., the magnetic field around the hatch reactivated from within. Karen's cheap lock clicked once, sparked, then hissed. No alarm. No explosion. Just a signal quietly sent to Homeland that the room had been sealed externally. And someone unauthorized had tampered with national security. The agents in the white van watched their screen. One of them smiled slightly. Game on. The sun rose over the neighborhood like it always did, but the energy on the block was unusually electric. Karen had organized a full HOA board meeting at the community clubhouse under the excuse of a code enforcement update. But everyone knew what it was really about. Word had spread that she had finally acted on her months-long obsession with Ryan's mysterious basement, and she was basking in the attention. Folding chairs filled the small hall as residents gathered, half curious, half concerned. Karen stood at the front with her signature binder in hand, her tone dripping with authority as she recapped the so-called operation. She described the padlocking of Ryan's hatch as a preemptive measure against potential zoning and safety violations. Some of the crowd nodded along. Others shifted uncomfortably. One elderly neighbor raised her hand and asked why the HOA didn't get a warrant. Karen responded with a dismissive laugh and said, "It's not a crime scene, it's an eyesore. And I don't need a judge to clean up my neighborhood." Ryan walked in just as the room fell into an awkward silence. He didn't speak. He didn't sit. He simply stood near the back wall with a look of measured calm on his face. Karen's smile tightened. She tried to carry on, reading off supposed violations. Things like unauthorized construction, suspicious ventilation, unregistered outbuildings. But her words felt forced now, defensive instead of assertive. When she asked if there were any questions, Ryan raised a single hand. "Did you verify ownership of the land before placing a lock?" Karen rolled her eyes. "It's part of your property. But as the board president, I can issue temporary security measures for code compliance." Ryan nodded. And did you inspect what's inside before locking it? She scoffed. Obviously not. That would have been a violation of your privacy, which I respect. There was a murmur of laughter in the room. Ryan's voice was calm, but his words landed like a hammer. So you locked a room you didn't inspect, on property that isn't yours, under the assumption of a violation you can't prove? Karen's smile faded completely. It's standard procedure. He replied simply, no, it's criminal trespass. And potentially worse. Karen tried to retake control. She cut Ryan's mic and motioned to a board member to mute the rear speakers. This meeting is adjourned, she declared, but the damage was done. Several neighbors began whispering. One of them, Greg, a younger board member who had joined mostly for the free HOA lunches, looked visibly shaken. He had wandered near Ryan's hatch earlier that week and peeked through the vent slits. What he saw had disturbed him. Rows of glowing server racks and security panels unlike anything used in civilian homes. He had quietly taken a picture, unsure of what he'd discovered. Now, seeing how intense things had gotten, he messaged Ryan anonymously. Man, I think she really messed up. That room's serious. What's in there? Ryan didn't respond. He had no interest in involving a nervous kid in federal protocols, but the internal countdown wasn't stopping. 30 hours left. He needed Karen to willingly remove the lock. But Karen, emboldened by her brief taste of control, went even further. Later that afternoon, she told local contractors to mark the area around the hatch for concrete analysis. She claimed the basement might be violating zoning limit. She posted blurry photos of Ryan's yard on the neighborhood app with captions like, "Protecting our families, investigating unauthorized structures." Residents began to worry. Some supported her. Others backed off, afraid they'd be next. At dusk, Ryan stood by his back fence watching the chalk lines spray-painted on his grass. He heard Karen approach before he saw her. Her voice was smug. "You might want to start applying for that permit. We'll be jackhammering next week to make sure there's no illegal infrastructure under your home." Ryan turned slowly, locking eyes with her. "You have no jurisdiction here." She raised an eyebrow. "The bylaws say otherwise." "The United States government says differently," he replied. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she laughed, brushing him off like he was a child. "You act like this is Fort Knox." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Back across town, Ryan's supervisor at Homeland reviewed the flagged report with growing frustration. A map showed the blinking red node still sealed. An agent leaned over and whispered, "If they start cutting into the cement, they could hit the relay junction. That triggers a full wipe and site alert." The supervisor rubbed his temples. "We told him 36 hours. He's down to 29. He tapped the screen. "Send in a handler for visual verification. And prepare the mobile unit. We might have to clean this up fast." The next morning, Ryan's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an alert. It was a single-word message from a separate encrypted number. "Soon." He checked the street. Nothing seemed different. Until a Harley rumbled into the neighborhood, the kind of entrance you don't expect in a suburban cul-de-sac lined with minivans and lawn gnomes. The man riding it looked like a cross between a biker and a soldier, beard, boots, and a steel gaze that didn't flinch. He parked directly in front of Karen's house and pulled off his helmet. Ryan stepped out of his home and smiled. "Took you long enough." The man nodded. "Had to finish something in Langley." "You bring your badge?" "Of course. But I brought something better too." He handed Ryan a small silver case. Ryan popped it open and nodded. "This should help." The man looked toward Karen's house and smirked. "She doesn't know yet, huh?" "No," Ryan replied. "But she's about to find out." Meanwhile, inside her home, Karen prepared for another live video. She had gained hundreds of views from her basement takedown. Her ego was inflated. She wanted to go viral again. This time she would show how to file a citizen zoning violation request against suspicious residents. She adjusted her hair, straightened her scarf, and pressed record. But before she could speak, her Wi-Fi cut out. Then her lights flickered. A voice crackled over a nearby speaker she didn't know existed in her home system. Unauthorized interference detected. Please remain indoors. Federal systems engaged. She screamed, unplugged the camera, and ran outside, just in time to see the biker walking toward Ryan's hatch with a scanning device in one hand and a badge in the other. She charged toward him, yelling, "Get off my community's land!" But the man raised his hand calmly. "Ma'am, you're interfering with an active federal operation. Step away now." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Residents gathered. Phones were filming. Greg stood by the curb, stunned. Karen looked around desperately for someone to back her up. No one moved. The biker turned to Ryan and said, "We've confirmed local interference. Physical breach confirmed. Are you ready for recovery phase?" Ryan nodded once. "Yes. Let's open the vault." Karen didn't move. Her lips trembled slightly as she stared down into the illuminated stairwell, the cool hum of active servers echoing from below like some mechanical heartbeat. The crowd of neighbors stood frozen behind her, caught between disbelief and dread, their phones half raised, unsure if they were filming a scandal or a state secret. Ryan remained quiet, his face calm but stern, standing beside the man in the leather jacket and tactical boots, who now held up a laminated federal ID that shimmered under the morning sun. Karen's voice finally broke the silence, weak but defiant. She pointed toward the hatch and said, "This can't be real. That's just some fancy computer setup. There's no way this is government-related. He's tricking all of you." The agent turned slowly, lifting a small black device to eye level. It blinked once, twice, then flashed green as it synced to the biometric reader beside the hatch. A soft hiss echoed from within, followed by a single chime and a robotic voice that announced, "Authorized access confirmed. Secondary relay synchronized." Internal lockout lifted. The agent looked back at Karen. "Still think he's faking it?" Karen's mouth opened again, but the words got stuck in her throat. Her eyes darted to the neighbors, looking for someone, anyone, to step in on her behalf. But they were already backing away, watching her unravel in real time. Greg stood behind them, arms crossed, finally understanding the weight of what he'd seen through the vent. One of the older residents leaned toward another and whispered, "Did she really lock up a government facility?" The whisper wasn't quiet enough. Karen heard it, and her expression twisted into something wild and desperate. "He never said it was government. None of us knew," she shouted. "This is all his fault. He should have told us." The agent turned to her calmly. "And if he had, you would have ignored protocol, interfered anyway, and probably posted about it online. People like you don't listen, you assume." Ryan watched Karen's face darken. For a moment, she looked like she might run, like she might lash out. But before she could act, the agent spoke again, voice low and cold. "Interfering with classified infrastructure is a federal crime. You placed a physical lock on a secured Homeland Security relay point. That alone is grounds for felony obstruction. We are currently debating whether or not to involve the Justice Department." Karen's voice cracked as she stammered, "You can't be serious. It was just a padlock. For safety." The agent narrowed his eyes. "You don't put safety locks on government servers. You don't dig up fiber lines with garden tools. And you certainly don't issue community fines for federal hardware. Your safety almost triggered a Level 4 data purge." Ryan said nothing. He didn't need to. The facts were speaking now. The agent stepped aside, motioning toward the open hatch. Two more individuals in plain clothes approached, carrying insulated equipment cases and tools. They slipped past the gathering crowd like shadows, descending the steps with quiet precision. Karen, now visibly sweating, turned and tried to walk away, but two local officers who had just arrived were already stepping into her path. "Ma'am," one said, "we need to ask you a few questions." She scoffed, "This is ridiculous. They're blowing this out of proportion." But the officers didn't move aside. One of them held out a printed document. "Federal Notice of Investigation," he said flatly. "You're being placed under administrative hold pending review." Karen's legs buckled slightly. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She staggered backward, caught by a neighbor who awkwardly helped her sit on the curb. Nobody offered her comfort. Nobody defended her. Meanwhile, inside the basement, the two federal techs were already working. Ryan followed behind them, scanning the systems. One of the racks had flickered dangerously close to backup shutdown. "You were minutes from wipeout," one of the agents said. "Lucky you triggered the override from the outside just in time." Ryan nodded. "The padlock heat signature gave me enough signal bleed to reactivate the local interface. Still, this could have been catastrophic." The agent shook his head. "This isn't just some data hub, man. This node is tethered to two major defense relay simulations and a national emergency archive. If that wiped, we'd be talking about millions of dollars in loss and potential threat exposure." Ryan exhaled slowly, gripping the railing. All because a suburban tyrant wanted to show off for Facebook. Upstairs, the mood had shifted entirely. Karen had vanished inside her house with the officers. Her supporters, what little remained of them, scattered quietly, no longer offering apologies or excuses. Greg stood silently beside the hatch, watching agents come and go. Ryan approached him, finally speaking after hours of tension. "You were the only one who second-guessed her." Greg shrugged. "I didn't know what I was looking at. I just knew something felt wrong. I'm sorry I didn't do more." Ryan nodded. "You did more than enough by not joining in." Greg hesitated. "Is she going to jail?" Ryan looked toward the agents, now loading a small container of deactivated drives into a secure van. "She might. Depends on how far they want to take it. Obstruction is serious, especially when the data involved can trigger national alerts." That evening, the community message board exploded with rumors, screenshots, and blurry photos of Karen being questioned by law enforcement. The video of the agent melting her padlock had gone viral. Someone clipped the moment she screamed about, "just trying to help the neighborhood," and overlaid dramatic music. It had 300,000 views in under 8 hours. Memes flooded the platform. One labeled her the Patriot Padlocker. Another featured her face next to the words, "This is MY server room now." Even local news outlets picked up the story, with headlines like, "HOA President Accidentally Locks Down Homeland Server. Oops." Meanwhile, Ryan remained silent online. He deleted no posts. He issued no statements. His silence spoke louder than any caption. By nightfall, the agents had restored full system integrity. The hatch was resealed with a biometric lock upgrade that didn't just deny access. It would send an instant GPS beacon if tampered with again. Ryan watched as the final agent clicked a case shut and said, "You shouldn't have to deal with this kind of thing. We're not supposed to have these in suburbs, you know." Ryan half smiled. "That's why it was here. No one expects it. That was the point." The agent nodded and added, "Well, it worked. Until it didn't." As the van pulled away, Ryan stood alone in his yard, the grass still marked with the HOA's chalk lines, a faint echo of Karen's ambition and arrogance. He walked over to the spot where the lock had fallen, picked up the melted remains, and placed them on the porch table. A reminder, not of weakness, but of what happens when power is used without understanding. The neighborhood lights dimmed. Screens went off. Cameras turned away. But in the silence that followed, one truth lingered clearly in everyone's mind. Karen didn't just mess with a basement, she messed with the backbone of a nation's secrets. And she had no idea how lucky she was that it hadn't ended worse. The HOA clubhouse had never felt so tense. What was once a room of potlucks and bake sales had become the stage for an emergency session unlike any the board had ever faced. Karen, now flanked by a frazzled attorney who looked like he regretted taking her case, sat stiffly at the end of the table, her eyes bloodshot, face pale. The board members who had once cheered her for cracking down on neighborhood order now sat with their arms crossed, speaking in hushed tones and stealing nervous glances at the door. A federal agent was scheduled to arrive shortly to deliver a formal briefing regarding the incident. That was the word used in the email, incident. Not misunderstanding. Not violation. Incident. The kind of term used when entire cities lose power or embassies go dark. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. It was the beginning of a reckoning. When the agent entered, the silence became absolute. He wasn't in a suit. No sunglasses. No dramatic trench coat. Just a calm demeanor, a lanyard ID, and a tablet in hand. He introduced himself, not that he needed to. Everyone had seen him earlier near the server hatch. He didn't sit. He stood near the projector screen and pulled up a satellite image of the neighborhood, zooming in on Ryan's property and highlighting the underground server node in flashing red. Without raising his voice, he began to explain exactly what had been locked down, what kind of systems had been threatened, and what kind of consequences the interference nearly caused. The board members visibly shrank as he spoke. Karen's attorney kept scribbling notes, occasionally whispering to her, only for her to shake her head as if still unable to accept the situation. The agent clicked to the next slide. A federal document stamped with Homeland Security emblems and classified notation. It had been cleared for presentation but not reproduction. At the top were the words, Provisional Violation Report. Karen's name was listed under a section titled Civilian Interference. The agent read aloud. On April 12 at approximately 14:07 hours, an unauthorized locking device was installed on the access hatch of DHS Node 47B without knowledge or consent of the authorized handler, triggering a breach detection protocol and escalating to national review. The subject, Karen Witherspoon, acting in capacity as HOA president, willfully applied a foreign physical security mechanism that obstructed emergency access to federal equipment. He paused, then turned to Karen. This is not just embarrassing. This is obstruction of federal operations. That is not something we ignore. Karen's voice cracked as she leaned forward. I didn't know. No one told me. How was I supposed to know it was federal? The agent replied. The hatch was marked in red with a code tag. The surrounding area was restricted under private property law. You crossed onto private land and installed a device without approval. That's trespass. Then you interfered with electronic equipment. That's tampering. And when asked to remove it, you refused. That's obstruction. It doesn't matter if you knew the details. You knew it wasn't yours. The words hit like hammers. Each one chipped away at the illusion of power Karen had clung to for so long. Her attorney tried to intervene. We'll cooperate fully moving forward. But surely this doesn't need to escalate into charges. The agent didn't smile. That's not up to me. The department is reviewing the case. If they proceed, she'll be summoned. The room erupted into a flurry of whispered debates. One board member stood abruptly and turned to Karen. You dragged all of us into this. You told us it was just some nerd hiding old gaming equipment. You said it was your right to investigate. You made us vote on it. Another one added, I lost sleep over this. We could have been liable. You don't just lock people's homes, Karen. You don't sneak around pretending to be a sheriff. Karen tried to shout over them, but her voice had lost its authority. There was no microphone to mute the room this time. Just raw, collective anger directed at her. The meeting dissolved into chaos as the agent closed his tablet and left without another word. His job was done. Now the neighborhood had to deal with itself. Outside, word spread fast. Neighbors stood in clusters, watching the board meeting leak into the parking lot like smoke after a fire. Greg leaned against his car, arms folded, still trying to wrap his head around how close things came to disaster. A few feet away, Ryan stood quietly, saying nothing, simply observing. A local news van had parked at the entrance, and a reporter was already prepping a microphone. Someone must have tipped them off. It didn't matter. The internet had already told the story, and by now, Karen was infamous. She wasn't trending anymore for her decorations or block parties. She was trending as the woman who almost caused a federal emergency over a basement she didn't understand. Later that night, Ryan sat on his porch, watching the security drones hover gently over the edge of his property. Homeland had dispatched an additional monitoring unit as a precaution, now that the location had gone viral. Ironically, Karen's actions had drawn more attention to the node than anyone had ever wanted. Ryan knew the project would be relocated eventually. The entire point was secrecy, and this neighborhood had lost that. But for now it was still live. Still his to protect. And still glowing silently beneath the lawn that Karen once tried to dig up. Across the street, Karen's house sat in darkness. Her porch light was off. Her usual garden flags had been taken down. No music played from her Bluetooth speakers. No flyers were tucked under doors. She was gone from the neighborhood group chat. No one had heard from her since the emergency board meeting. Rumors swirled that she had hired a crisis PR firm. Others claimed she was preparing to resign from the board altogether. A few suggested she'd been issued a travel restriction, though no one could confirm it. But everyone knew one thing: Karen Witherspoon wasn't running the neighborhood anymore. The next morning, the HOA email list was updated. Karen's name had been removed from the president's role. Greg's name was listed under interim board liaison, and a message was attached announcing mandatory retraining for all board members on legal boundaries and private property enforcement. Ryan smiled faintly when he read that. Not out of pettiness, but relief. They had finally learned. Or at least, they had been forced to. Later that day, a neighbor approached Ryan near the mailboxes. She was older, had always kept to herself, and never said much. But she gave him a nod and quietly said, "I always thought she was going too far. I'm glad you handled it like you did." Ryan thanked her, then turned back toward his house. A new padlock sat on the table outside. Not melted. Not forced. Just a polished, heavy-duty security lock, engraved with a federal seal and a tracker built into its core. It wasn't for protection anymore. It was for reminder. A reminder that power, when misused, doesn't just cause problems, it invites consequences. That what seems like a small action in a quiet neighborhood can ripple outward and touch systems far beyond what anyone can imagine. And for once, in the world of HOA politics, the consequences hadn't been measured in citations or warnings. They had been measured in server loads, encrypted files, federal clearance levels, and the thud of melted metal falling into grass. The week after the fallout was one of eerie quiet across the neighborhood. The block, once alive with HOA announcements, lawn sign debates, and Karen's shrill patrols, now felt like a deflated balloon. Conversations took place in whispers instead of porch rant. Driveways remained empty longer, and the air carried a sense of collective embarrassment, as if everyone was trying to figure out how they'd allowed things to spiral so far. Karen's house, previously the hub of unwanted enforcement and unsolicited complaints, remained shuttered with its blinds drawn tight. The usual signs of her presence, clipboards, gardening gloves, her little HOA golf cart, were nowhere to be seen. Rumors circulated that she had fled town for a break, but the local papers confirmed that she was under pending review from federal investigators and had been served formal notification of potential charges. No arrest had been made yet, but a case had clearly been opened. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his life with the same quiet precision as before, only now with far fewer interruptions. Homeland had increased security protocols around the basement temporarily, not out of fear, but due to the attention the location had received. 2 men in black sedans rotated every 12 hours on his street, and a mobile fiber audit team had been assigned to inspect the neighborhood for potential vulnerabilities. The irony wasn't lost on Ryan. Karen had screamed for more security on the block for years, and now she had gotten it, just not the way she imagined. She had envisioned HOA patrols with reflective vests and whistles. Instead, she got encrypted transmissions, badge-carrying feds, and quiet nods from men who only spoke in clipped code word. The HOA itself underwent a rapid restructuring. After Karen's removal, several other board members resigned, either out of guilt or the realization that they had backed the wrong leader far too publicly. Greg, the younger member who had first warned Ryan anonymously, was appointed interim president by unanimous vote. He didn't want the job, but nobody else stepped forward. His first action was to freeze all pending citations and investigate whether the HOA had overstepped on other properties as well. His second action was to send an apology letter to Ryan. It wasn't formal or fancy, just a note left in his mailbox that read, "I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. I should have known better. We all should have." One evening, about 10 days after the federal presentation at the HOA clubhouse, a black SUV with tinted windows returned. This time, it wasn't here to monitor. A Homeland Security representative stepped out and requested to speak to Ryan privately. Inside the house, they discussed relocation. The agency had decided that the server node beneath his home had become too public, too exposed. Ryan understood. He had expected this. The representative explained that a new secure location had been approved, and the migration would begin within the week. Ryan nodded slowly. The basement had been his responsibility for years. Quiet, secret, and essential, but it was never meant to stay forever. It had served its purpose, and now it was time to move on. On the day of the migration, large nondescript trucks pulled into the neighborhood. No markings, no loud announcements. Just quiet professionalism. The agents worked efficiently, removing the server racks piece by piece, wrapping everything in blackout containment to shield from drones, eyes, or speculation. The entire process took less than 6 hours. By the time the sun began to set, the hatch had been sealed, the biometric locks disengaged, and the entrance covered in temporary concrete. No signs remained of what once hummed beneath the soil, only a faint discoloration in the grass and a subtle impression where wires had once connected. Ryan stood at the edge of it all, arms crossed, watching as the final truck rolled down the street and disappeared beyond the trees. That night, he sat alone on his porch, the silence no longer tense but peaceful. For the first time in years, he wasn't guarding something. He wasn't checking systems or rerouting data. He was just home, and it felt strangely unfamiliar. A knock came at his door, soft but deliberate. He opened it to find Greg holding a clipboard, not with fines or forms, but with a new set of HOA policies. "We rewrote the bylaws," he said. "All board activity now requires homeowner consent and third-party oversight. No more padlocks. No more investigations without cause." Ryan read the first page and smiled faintly. It wasn't perfection, but it was accountability. And that was a start. Karen, meanwhile, had been served with an official notice barring her from HOA leadership positions indefinitely, both locally and in any future communities where such organizations operated. Her name had been entered into a private federal watch list for unauthorized civilian interference in protected infrastructure. It didn't mean she was under surveillance, but it did mean her actions would never be buried. She had become a case study. Her face now existed in quiet federal memos titled Civilian Overreach, Suburban Case File 12C. No criminal conviction had been announced yet, but a civil suit was brewing. Ryan had chosen not to file it himself. Homeland had taken over, arguing that any damage done to their operations was theirs to address, and they had deeper pockets and stronger lawyers than Ryan would ever need. On the anniversary of the incident, the neighborhood gathered for a community barbecue. It was Greg's idea, a way to move forward, to mend fences and start fresh. Ryan attended, sitting in the shade, quietly enjoying a burger as kids ran past and laughter returned to the air. At one point, a man with a camera approached him and asked if he wanted to say a few words on record. Ryan shook his head. "I'm not the story," he said. "The story is what happens when people in charge forget why rules exist in the first place." As the evening drew to a close, Greg raised a toast. He didn't mention Karen by name. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, we learned a lot this year. About power, about privacy, and about the danger of acting like you own what you don't understand. Let's never repeat that mistake again. The crowd clapped, quiet but sincere. Later, alone in his garage, Ryan opened a small metal box he had kept hidden for years. Inside were 2 ID badges, a set of encrypted USB drives, and a black coin embossed with an eagle gripping lightning bolt. He placed the coin into a lockbox and sealed it. That part of his life was finished now. But the lessons would stay with him. The next morning, a new family moved into the house across from Karen's old place. The mother smiled warmly as Ryan waved hello. She asked about the neighborhood, if it was safe, if people were friendly. Ryan thought for a moment before replying, "We've had our drama. But we learned from it. You're in good hands now." She smiled, reassured, and continued unpacking. As Ryan turned to go back inside, he paused for a moment and looked toward the place where the hatch once was. Grass had begun to grow over it, soft and green. You'd never know what once lived beneath it unless you were there. Unless you saw it. But Ryan remembered. And he would make sure no one ever forgot.